G'day guys, how are we doing? Welcome to another episode of Dream Fights. And tonight we've got in this episode a little bit of a special theme, and it is the heavyweights. I know we normally just do or pick a fighter and we'll put 10 fighters up against them, but I was just thinking about during the week that we have so many great heavyweights over the years, so I would match a few of them up together. Now, just a bit of a spoiler, this is not, or a little bit of, I suppose, a disclaimer, this is not, in my opinion, the best 20 heavyweights to ever walk the earth, and I'll put them in 10 fights against each other. These are just 10 fights. Look, the top end are obviously special fights, but there's a few other fights on there that I've just matched them up because they're good matchups. There's a couple on here that you'll go, what, this guy isn't one of the all-time greats. I get it. They're just good, even matchups against fighters from different eras, of different styles. Another disclaimer I'll actually let you know now is that I put the poll up on Instagram, and I've got the results here, and I'll go over them. But when I was doing the setup for this episode, I thought a couple of the matchups just didn't look right. So what I've actually done, I've gone against my own sort of rules, and I've changed a couple of fights. Now, that's not going to make a few of you happy out there because everyone's voted on it. We had a lot of votes for this, by the way, too, which was great. But I have changed 2 fights, okay? Just as I said, a little admission there. But I'm sure you'll agree that they have worked out a little bit better than maybe what they would have been with the initial matchups. A little bit more exciting anyway. But so if you're not quite sure how this works, as I said at the start, we normally just have one fighter and we put them up against 10 fighters from different eras and give our points of view and opinions, who wins and why. And then I have the results here as well. But as I said, in this episode, what I've done is just put 20 of the best, 20 of the most entertaining heavyweights of all time against each other. Anyway, I'm sort of going around in circles here a little bit, aren't I? But I've got a couple of people in the chat already. Here we got OG Lights Out. How are you there, mate? Yes, thanks very much, mate. And also to you, Nectar of the Guide. So, look, and the reason I do this live as well is that I want your input. Even though we haven't got many in there at the moment, I'm sure we'll get a few more as they get notifications that I'm live. And I forgot to actually mention it this morning on Walking Boxing. But anyway, hopefully we'll get a few in. Either way, I want your feedback. So when we go through the fights, I want to hear your opinions of who you think wins and why. And we can debate it, discuss it, whatever you might want to call it. So we will start probably with a few of the more entertaining fights rather than legacy fights, I suppose, is probably the best way to describe them for starters anyway. But we'll get into it. As I said, we've got 10 fights, and we'll start with our first dream fight. And this is really, in my opinion, a little bit of the battle of the battlers. It's James Bonecrusher Smith up against Gentleman Jerry Cooney. Let's start with Bonecrusher Smith. He had a 44-17-1 record. Turned pro back in 1981. I'll just go to the home screen there. Rounded up a couple of wins, most notably against Frank Bruno back in 1984. Got his first shot at Larry Holmes for the IBF heavyweight title. Lost that when he was stopped by a cut eye. Lost his next fight to Tony Tubbs, and it was really a matter of where he's going to go after that. But he actually strung together a win against Jose Rebolta. And I was just looking at his record there. So he beat Rebolta, and then he lost to Tim Witherspoon and Marvis Fraser. That's probably where it looked like his career was at the crossroads. 4 losses in 5 fights. But he came back. He had a first-round knockout of Mike Weaver, followed up with a 10-round decision over Jesse Ferguson, another 10-round decision over David Bay, all solid contenders, and then won the WBA heavyweight title with that upset first-round knockout of Tim Witherspoon as a late replacement. Lost it in his first defense against Mike Tyson in 87. Had some other sort of notable fights after that against the likes of Razor Ruddock, Mike Weaver again, and then it pretty much went downhill for him after that. Ended his career actually with a loss against Larry Holmes in 1999. As for his opponent, Gentleman Jerry Cooney, had a 28-3 record, 24 knockouts, was all the rage there for a while until he beat Ken Norton, didn't he? By first round knockout, but then came up against Larry Holmes, was stopped in the 13th round. Is the anniversary of that fight today, by the way, the 43rd year anniversary. And then it was injuries and false starts and all that for a long, long time. He didn't actually fight for over 2 years after the Holmes fight. And then, as I said, fought spasmodically. Came up against Michael Spinks in 1987, was knocked out in 5 rounds, and then his career was ended for good against George Foreman in 1990. All right, to the poll. First of all, the winner of the first fight, we'll call it a split decision. 57% of the votes went for James Bonecrusher Smith. Pretty tough one for me. I don't know, like, Bonecrusher was so mechanical in that he was just a stand-up guy, very limited skills. He had an okay jab, obviously could punch as well. Jerry Cooney, though, I must say, was probably even more limited. He had a little bit of style about him, but I think he was more heart than skill, was Jerry Cooney. Look, I don't think we ever really saw the best of Jerry Cooney. I mean, after the Larry Holmes fight in 82, he only had, 5 fights in the 8 years following that fight. So lots of different things that stopped him there. Look, I'm going to go with Bonecrusher Smith as well. I'm going to agree with the poll. I just think that Bonecrusher was probably slightly less limited than what Jerry Cooney was, if that makes sense. Would have been a very, very even fight. Surprisingly enough, I don't think there would have been a knockout. Both of these guys had big knockout records. Cooney had 24 knockouts in 28 fights. And I've just lost Bonecrusher's record there. I'll bring it back here in a sec. Hang on, where are we? Bonecrusher. So Bonecrusher had 32 knockouts in 44 wins. And what did I say there? I've lost his record there. Jerry Cooney, 24 knockouts and 28 wins. So actually, there's Hanoi Tripper in the chat. There actually would have been a really good one, that one, Hanoi. Peter McNeely versus Tommy Morrison would have been not too bad. But as I said, look, I just think that Jerry Cooney was slightly more limited than what Bonecrusher Smith was. It would have been an entertaining fight. Oh, that's what I said before, wasn't it, about the knockouts. Even though they both had a lot of knockouts, surprisingly, I think this one goes the distance, and I think Bonecrusher Smith will say, I think this would have been a 10-rounder. I doubt there would have been any titles at stake in this one. So I'm going to go with James Bonecrusher Smith by unanimous 10-round decision over Jerry Cooney. Nectar of the Gods has Smith by decision as well. Good stuff. What's that, OG? To say, and love your boxing is an understatement. Well, thanks, OG. Yeah, well, I have been a mad boxing fan since about the age of 8. So I've followed it for that long, mate. So that's why I love doing these dream fights, because a lot of these fighters I've sort of grown up with over the years. So that is my opinion on the first fight, Bonecrusher on points. Let's go to the next one. This time we have Englishman Daniel Dubois up against terrible Tim Witherspoon. We'll start with Daniel Dubois. He's got a 22-2 record, 21 knockouts. Of course, he's got that big fight with Alexander Usyk coming up. Turned pro in 2017. Had a couple of losses there to start, didn't he? Where was it his first loss? Lost to Joe Joyce by 10th round stoppage in 2020. And then also the loss to Alexander Usyk in 2023. Has come back with wins over Big Baby Miller, Philip Hergovich, and Anthony Joshua since then. And terrible Tim Witherspoon with a record of 55-13-1 with 38 knockouts. He turned pro in 1979. Had a couple of good wins against Alfonso Ratliff and Ronaldo Snipes to earn a shot at Larry Holmes' WBC heavyweight title back in 1983. Lost that fight, but came back with wins over James Quick Tillis and Greg Page to win the vacant WBC belt. Lost it against Pinklon Thomas, but came back to win the WBA title over Tony Tubbs, and then had fights against the likes of, had wins over Frank Bruno. Who else have we got there? Lots of good fighters over the journey anyway. Carl the Truth Williams, but sort of fizzled out as his career went on, and I think he lost his last couple he did, against Lou Savarese and Brian Nix. All right, so who wins this one and why? G'day, Kane. How are you there, mate? Give us your opinions. And just in case I go to the next fight before you comment, guys, don't worry, I will go back and address that. All right, so who wins? Daniel Dubois or who was it? Terrible Tim Witherspoon. The poll there. And the winner, if I can find it, was Witherspoon. Let's call it by unanimous decision. 73% went for Tim Witherspoon to beat Daniel Dubois. Now, this is a fight that sort of reminds me of the Frank Bruno fight. Now, I did actually have Frank Bruno in one of these fights at one stage, and I took him out just because the mix wasn't quite right. I'm not quite sure. Well, I was going to say, I think I might have even had him against Daniel Dubois at one stage, to be honest, and I took him out. So anyway, but I think this would be a lot like that. I think, again, it would depend on Tim Witherspoon's, what would you call it, preparation, let's say. Because if he turned up in shape, I think he could win this fight quite decisively. If he turned up in average shape, which he did quite often, I think Dubois could beat him. Having said that, though, he did turn up vastly overweight against Frank Bruno. And where was that fight? That fight was in 1986 from memory. Yeah, he turned up at 234 in that fight, whereas against Larry Holmes, he was 219, so it's 15 pounds heavier. Look, yeah, I think either way, I'm going to go for Tim Witherspoon. I think he could actually stop Daniel Dubois late. Dubois would have his moments. He's not a bad boxer. Dubois, he can punch, of course. A little bit mechanical, though, and that's probably why I liken him to Frank Bruno, and I think that's why the result would be similar. You remember that Witherspoon stopped or knocked out Bruno, I think it was in the 11th round back in 86 for that WBA belt in England, and as I said, I think this fight goes pretty much the same with a stoppage win by Tim Witherspoon. Hanoi Tripper says, what do you got there? Maybe Witherspoon on points over Dubois. Nectar of the God says Dubois for me. And Kane Mack has Dubois by KO. Well, pretty sure Witherspoon only got stopped once in his career. That was by Bonecrusher Smith by that upset first round stoppage. He wasn't actually knocked down in that fight, by the way. He was dropped 3 times and they waved it off. But yeah, I'm not sure whether Dubois got the power. I mean, he's a big man, isn't he, though, Dubois? What's he weigh? His last fight against Joshua, he was 248 pounds. They make him big these days, don't they? So, yeah, maybe it would give him some sort of advantage, but I don't think that would worry Tim Witherspoon too much. So I'm going to back Tim Witherspoon, as I said, to win this fight on or by knockout, I would probably think. All right, keep the comments coming there, guys, and I will go back to them as we go. Let's go on to fight number 3. This is one of the fights I actually changed. So this one is Michael Spinks versus Ken Norton. Now, originally, I think I had Spinks against Bo, and I had Norton against Joshua, but I've actually swapped those fights around. So I will have no poll, obviously, because it wasn't on the list. Where are we? I'll go to that there. Michael Spinks, 31-1, 21 knockouts, the first light heavyweight to win the heavyweight crown. He did that in 1985. Before that, he won the world light heavyweight title in 1981, I think it was. Yes. Defended it numerous times before that Holmes fight. Did have the wins over. That's interesting. When he beat Stefan Tankstead in his first defense for the IBF title, then fought Jerry Cooney in a non-title fight, which is not very often you see that happen. And then the final fight of his career was a year later when he took on Mike Tyson. We all know how that ended. But yeah, ended up with a 31-1 record, 21 knockouts. Ken Norton, 42-7-1 with 33 knockouts. Turned pro way back in 1967. Had that actually lost. When did he lose? 1970. He actually lost by knockout. Didn't know that actually, against Jose Luis Garcia. Had his big break against I was going to say Larry Holmes then, Muhammad Ali in 1973. With that 12-round decision win, he would lose the next 2 fights against Muhammad Ali. He'd be knocked out by George Foreman as well. Beat the likes of Jerry Quarry, Dwayne Bobic. Remember that one? He was a big wide height, wasn't he, Dwayne Bobic, and knocked him out in, was it 1 round? But fought a lot of the best. Jimmy Young, Larry Holmes, Ernie Shavers, and that final lost in his career against Jerry Cooney. So very, very tough and good fighter back in the day was Ken Norton. All right, so again, we haven't got a poll for that one. But between the two, I'm going to have to go for Michael Spinks in this one. I think, look, Ken Norton was a big guy and muscular, strong. I just think Michael Spinks' smarts would have been too much for Ken Norton. I think even though Michael Spinks was a smallish, well, I was going to say smallish heavyweight, he was a tiny heavyweight, wasn't he? But I just think his boxing skills, I think from long range, yes, there was always the possibility of Ken Norton getting in close and maybe getting the knockout. But I think the fact that Michael Spinks was able to handle himself against Holmes and Cooney and these types of guys, I just think he would have had enough to stay away from Ken Norton and win by, I'll say, unanimous decision. Now, could have Norton have landed one and ended it? Of course he could have, and I've got that Michael Spinks fight sort of in the background there. But I just think that fight aside, Michael Spinks showed that he could more than handle himself at heavyweight. And I just think with his ring smarts and IQ, he would confuse Ken Norton, keep him at long range, and I think he would win a 12-round decision or 15-round decision if that was the case back in the day as well. So Michael Spinks for me. Let me know what you think there, guys. All right, we'll move on to the next fight. This has got explosive or explosion written all over it. It is Deontay Wilder up against Tommy Morrison. Deontay Wilder, 43-4-1, 42 knockouts, just the one draw. Turned pro back in 2008. And when did he win the heavyweight title? What year was it? Because he had 10 title defenses, of course. I don't think when he actually won it. So he won that, I'm sure all you guys know. It was, just looking at the year, 2015, when he knocked out Bermain Stervern. I think he did that a couple of times. Sorry, actually, that was the one time he went to decision. Sorry, I've got the wrong fight there. So he won a 12-round decision, one of only 2 decisions in his life. So defended it 10 times, then had that memorable trilogy with Tyson Fury. What did he have Fury down 2 or 3 times during that trilogy? Might even be more, and lost those last 2 fights. Hasn't gone to plan since then. He's lost his last 2 fights against Joseph Parker and Zhilei Zhang, but has got a comeback fight in about 2 weeks' time against Terrell Herndon. So we'll see how he goes in that one, see if he can get back amongst it. Tommy the Duke Morrison, 48-3-1, 42 knockouts. So a lot of knockouts between these guys. The late Duke, Tommy Morrison, turned pro in 1988 and has had, a lot of knockouts along the line there. Got probably his first opportunity when he beat James Quick Tillis and Pinklon Thomas as well. Stopped both of those guys, but then ran into Ray Mercer in 1991. I think we've all seen the highlights of that fight, but responded very, very well and ended up beating George Foreman for the WBO heavyweight title in 1993. Lost it to Michael Bent by that first round knockout. That was just brutal. He had a couple of brutal knockouts, didn't he? And never really recovered. He beat Donovan Razor Ruddock, but was also stopped by Lennox Lewis. And last fought in 2008 before, unfortunately, passing away a few years after that. So very, very unfortunate. And of course, we remember him from the Rocky movies as well. Rocky 5, wasn't it? So we'll remember Tommy Morrison fondly. But as for this fight, let's go to the scorecards. And the winner, we'll say by unanimous decision, is Tommy Morrison. 73% of you out there thought that he'd get the job done. Sorry, did I get you before, Kane? You thought Dubois by KO? Yep, over Witherspoon. Tommy Morrison by KO over Deontay Wilder. Well, I'm going to agree with you, Kane. Look, I just think the way these two guys fought, I just think it all just points in one direction, and that's Tommy Morrison. Deontay Wilder has shown how, let's say, limited that he is. I can't believe he had 10 world title defenses. I know, as Mickey would say in Rocky 3, they were handpicked. I'm not going to say they were set up or anything like that, but they were definitely handpicked for Deontay Wilder, and there wasn't really a lot of depth around at that stage. Look, make no mistake about it, the guy can punch. I just think with Tommy Morrison, look, there's a possibility he could land that right hand early. We've seen Tommy Morrison get caught a couple of times. He was knocked out brutally. So, look, the odds are at some stage a right hand's going to get through, and how's Tommy going to react? I just think that Tommy's overall, that slipping side to side and bobbing and weaving, coming in inside, a little bit like a bigger, sort of inferior version of a Mike Tyson. I just think that would be enough to evade Wilder's punches. Wilder just would have nothing except the right hand. We know that for a fact. I just think that Tommy would be slipping, weaving, coming inside, and I can just see him coming with that big left hook and just wipe Deontay Wilder out. So I'm going to go for Tommy Morrison by knockout. I'm probably going to say 3 or 4 rounds. It'd be exciting while it lasted. I'm sure Deontay Wilder would certainly throw a few at Tommy Morrison, but again, I just think his evasive skills and his overall ability would be too much for Wilder, especially when he got that left hook cracking, and I can just seeing him just slipping, weaving underneath and just exploding a left hook off Wilder's jaw, and that is all over. So for me, Tommy Morrison by knockout. All right, let's move on to the next fight. This is another one that I've changed. This is Anthony Joshua up against Riddick Bowe. And I think you'd agree this is a better fight than Joshua and Norton or Bowe and Spinks. When I was loading it up, I thought, I think this would be a lot better fight. So Joshua and Bowe. So again, we haven't got the results from the polls, but I'll go through it and give my prediction. Anthony Joshua, 28-4, 25 knockouts. The Olympic gold medalist turned pro in 2013. Was guided pretty carefully until he fought. He actually had wins over Dillian Whyte, and then fought Klitschko for. No, actually, what was he? When did he win the world title? Who was that against? Is that right? Oh, that's right. Was it? I'm just trying to think because I don't have the WBA on here, do they? Unified against Charles Martin for the IBF belt. I remember that, and then had the win over Vladimir Klitschko for the IBF, IBO world titles. Wins over Joseph Parker. Lost the belt, to Andy Ruiz, regained it in the rematch, and since then it's been a little bit up and down. And the 2 losses to Alexander Usyk, got back on track with a few knockouts against inferior opponents, and then was knocked out himself by Daniel Dubois in September last year. So we'll see what happens to him over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, see where he ends up, but still very active in his career. And Riddick Bowe, 43-1, 33 knockouts, the Olympic silver medalist. Actually lost to Lennox Lewis in the 88 Olympics, turned pro in 89, and had his big opportunity against Evander Holyfield in 1990. What year was it? 1992. Before that, he'd actually beaten the likes of Tommy Morrison, Smokin' Burt Cooper, Terrell Biggs, Tony Tubbs, Pinklon Thomas, I don't think he did. Bruce Seldon. So he had a really, really good apprenticeship before he got his shot at the world title. And as I said, beat Evander Holyfield for the belts. Defended against Michael Dokes, Jesse Ferguson. Lost the rematch to Evander Holyfield. Would have a third fight against Holyfield and beat him. Also fights against Andrew Galotto, who can forget those fights, and retired in 2008. In my opinion, a very underachieving heavyweight champion, even though it sounds silly to say that with those wins over Holyfield. I think he could have been a lot better than what he ended up being. Just a little bit lazy, in my opinion, but certainly one of the best heavyweights of his era. All right, what have we got there? Nectar of the Gourds, Bowe by KO. Okay, Kane Mack says Bowe for me. He was such a great boxer. Would have gave Joshua fits. Yeah, look, I tend to agree. Of course, as I said, there's no poll votes here, but for me, I think Riddick Bowe stops Anthony Joshua. Again, Joshua, it seems to be a little bit a common theme with the British fighters, don't they? They all seem a little bit stiff and robotic, and Joshua's a little bit the same. Yeah, he can punch, but Riddick Bowe took a hell of a punch too. I just think his overall boxing ability, I could just see Bowe out jabbing Joshua, outworking him on the inside, being able to take whatever Joshua could throw at him, and I could just see as the fight going on, I can just see Riddick Bowe breaking him down and maybe stopping him in 9, 10, maybe 11 rounds. Riddick Bowe, as I said, an underachieving champion, but on his night could beat the best of them. And we saw that against Holyfield and numerous other really good heavyweights over the journey. So it's just a shame we never got to see him against the likes of Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson to see what he was really made of. But for me, Riddick Bowe with a sort of later round stoppage of Anthony Joshua for me. All right, let's move into some of the more juicier fights here. Let's start with this is one from the past. I just wanted to get a few of the older fighters in there, but I had to match them against each other because it's very hard to match these guys against the modern day heavyweights because of the size difference, the way they fought, the rounds, just call it everything. So I've actually matched them up against each other, and I found what I think is a really top-notch heavyweight showdown. It is Joe Louis against Sonny Liston. I'll just get rid of these ones up here. So Joe Louis, 66-3, 52 KOs, turned pro way back in 1934 and defended it. I haven't got it in front of me. I'm pretty sure he defended the title about 26 times. Now, I might be mistaken, but he had that early setback against Max Schmeling. Ended up avenging that loss with a first round knockout, and had those memorable fights with all those defenses against the likes of Jimmy Braddock and Jack Sharkey and all these types of guys. And said there the win over Max Schmeling. Ended up having the loss against Rocky Marciano later in his career. But look, he had so many fights. I won't go through the whole lot there. But fights against Izzard Charles and Jersey Joe Walcott, all these types of guys. So just a legend of the sport. Sonny Liston's a little bit of an enigma. 50 wins, 4 losses, 39 KOs. Now, he was the Mike Tyson of his era until he ran into Muhammad Ali in 1964. He won the title, of course, over Floyd Patterson. 2 first-round knockouts, and then lost to Muhammad Ali in the 6th round. And never really recovered after that. Of course, he had that first round, we'll call it a knockout loss to Muhammad Ali. And after that, never really got back on track. Had a fair few wins, lost later in his career, 1969, but never got another shot at the world title, and ended his career in 1970 with a 9th round stoppage over Chuck Wepner, the inspiration for Rocky. All right, let's go to the poll, and the winner, if I've got it here, surprisingly, for me, very surprisingly, the winner, we'll call it split decision, 55% of the vote, Sonny Liston, Charles Sonny Liston, 55% thought he would beat Joe Louis, which, as I said, was really surprising to me. Look, I'm going to back Joe Louis every day of the week in this fight. I just think that Sonny Liston was a killer, but for me, a limited killer. Not to say Joe Louis was Muhammad Ali-esque in his skill set, by no means, but he had a bit of everything to Joe Louis. He had a great jab. He had power shots. Now, whether Sonny Liston's aggression and power would negate that, I'm not sure. I'm going to put this down to just pure boxing skill. And I think that Joe Louis would keep Sonny Liston at a distance and would outbox him over 15 rounds. Now, the weights, I'm just going to look at that. So, Sonny Liston was between 215 and 220, where Joe Louis was actually pretty small. He was sort of around the 200 mark, so actually a really small heavyweight. By the standards of today, he'd be tiny. Well, he'd be a cruiserweight in this day and age. But for me, I'm still going to stick with Joe Louis. I think he would, as I said, keep Sonny Liston at bay with his jab, and I think he would win. A close-ish 15-round decision. I think the class of Joe Louis would come to the fore as the fight went on. I'm not so sure Sonny Liston would be able to fight 15 rounds at a really hard pace. He was more that Mike Tyson type of fighter, very dangerous early, but faded as the fight went on. And I think Joe Louis, if he survived those first sort of 5 or 6 rounds, which I think he would pull away and win a decision over Sonny Louis. Sorry, I'm just looking at your Sonny Liston. I'm looking at your comment there, Kane. Louis for me, but none. There's more of a punt. Not too sure. All right. What else have we got there? So we'll move on to the next one. We're just moving through the fights. What have we got? All right, so we've got 4 fights to go. Give me your thoughts too, by the way, guy. Oh, Lewis, sorry. It's the way you spelled his name. Lewis for me, but there's more of a punt. Not too sure. Yeah, sorry. I didn't know which one I was going to say, I hadn't mentioned Lennox Lewis yet. Joe Louis. Yeah, as I said, mate, I think he would win on points. Next one. All right. These are the 4, I think, really juicy ones. We'll start with the Eastern Assassin, Larry Holmes, up against the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury. Larry Holmes, 69-6, 44 KOs, turned pro way back in 1973. Got his big opportunity against Ken Norton in 1978. Also beat Ernie Shavers before that. And then went on a roll, didn't he? He was just unstoppable over the next few years. He had that win over Muhammad Ali that people never really forgave him for, but also wins over Trevor Berbick, Leon Spinks, Ronaldo Snipes, Jerry Cooney, Tex Cobb, Tim Witherspoon. Remember when he fought Joe Fraser's son Marvis? David Bay, Carl the Truth Williams, and lost the title to Michael Spinks. Then lost to Mike Tyson. So he lost 3 in a row. It looked like his career was over. And then came back and had a second career, just like Evander Holyfield did. Beat Ray Mercer over 12 rounds in 1992 to earn a shot at Evander Holyfield. He lost that fight in 1992 as well. And that still didn't deter him. He actually fought Oliver McCall for the WBC title in 95 and continued on until 2002, where he retired after beating, Eric Ish? Is that Butterbean? I think it is. And retired in 2002. As for Tyson Fury, 34-2-1, 24 knockouts. Is he retired or not? We don't know. He turned pro in 2008. Beat Klitschko for the title in, 2015 from memory? Where are we? 2015. Had those memorable fights with Deontay Wilder. Also, the 2 losses, obviously, against Usyk. Beat Chisora, Dillian White, everyone apart from Alexander Usyk. And had 34-2-1, 24 knockout record. All right, who wins and why? Let's go to the scorecards. And with a percentage of 75%, the unanimous decision winner is Larry Holmes. Yes, the Eastern Assassin, 75% thought that he would beat Tyson Fury. All right, couple of your comments. It's all right, Kane. Don't stress, mate. Just confused me with the spelling of Lewis, that's all. Julian Shoulders says Larry Holmes easily. Nectar of the Guide says Holmes, I think, boxed better and could punch as well. Fury is awkward. Yes, he is, mate. He is. Yeah, look, I think for me, this is a relatively easy one for me. I think Larry Holmes would win this fight comfortably. Now, the reason I say that, I know Tyson Fury, very awkward. He sort of, for a big man, did tend to bounce in and out. He's got a pretty good jab. Not a lot of power, though, which I don't think would go well for him against someone like Larry Holmes. I think you need to get his respect. Some of those bigger guys like Bonecrusher Smith got his respect by really putting it on him. I don't think that's sort of Tyson Fury's style. I think he's more of a boxer himself. And it just comes down to, for me, is that sledgehammer jab that Larry Holmes had. And I just think he'd be able to keep that in Tyson Fury's face. I just don't think Tyson would be able to get off in any way. I don't think he'd be able to out-jab Larry Holmes. I just think with his style, I'm just not sure how he beats Larry Holmes. I just can't see in any way that him getting past that sort of puzzle of Larry Holmes' jab in his face all night. Larry had a really good right hand as well. He had this habit of he'd throw the jab out and just hold it there for a split second to block the eye. Then he would throw the right hand afterwards. And I just think his overall boxing ability would just be far too much for Tyson Fury. And I've got Larry Holmes either by 12-round decision or 15-round decision, regardless of the distance that it was. So I think for me, Larry Holmes is in the top 2 or 3 heavyweights for me of all time, and I think he'd prove that against Tyson Fury. All right, who you guys got there? Pussy says Fury for me. Kane Mack says I'm going for Fury on points because he's so big and awkward. Yeah, it's a good point, Kane. I think you need more against Larry Holmes than just being awkward. Now, I'm not talking about the Larry Holmes at the second coming of Larry Holmes. I'm talking about the one from the early 80s. From 1980 to 1984. He was just something else. No one could get near him, whether you're tall, short, big, small. Didn't matter whether you're a boxer, whether you're a puncher. He handled everybody. And again, we saw him. I know Tyson Fury is probably probably a lot more talented than someone like a Bonecrusher Smith or a Jerry Cooney, Carl the Truth Williams, who are all very, very tall guys. Larry handled them all pretty easily. Carl the Truth Williams had a little bit of success against Larry, but it was more so by his speed and his youth. I don't think Tyson Fury would have the same luxuries against Larry Holmes, and I just think, Larry Holmes, I think, would be the aggressor. I think Larry would take center ring. I think he would back Tyson Fury up, who I think would try and box Larry, and I think that would play into Larry's hands. I think if the other way, if Tyson Fury got on the front foot, I still think Larry would have enough with that jab. He just had this habit. He jabbed to the head, he jabbed to the body, he jabbed back to the head, and I just think that would be enough just to keep Fury at bay. And I'm just not sure whether Tyson Fury would have the answers to go with Larry Holmes. So for me, Larry Holmes on points over Tyson Fury. All right, 3 to go. Where are we? And these are some very, very good fights. Let's start with the third last one, or the semi-main event, or the whatever you might want to call it. Evander Holyfield, the real deal, up against Smokin' Joe Fraser. Evander Holyfield, 44, 10 and 2, 29 knockouts. Turned pro in 1984. Finally got a shot at the world. Well, I say finally. He got it very, very early in his career when he beat Dwight Muhammad Kawi for the WBA, was it cruiserweight title? Yes, it was a cruiserweight title. Defended it numerous times, moved up to heavyweight, had wins, or he actually unified the cruiserweight title against Carlos de Leon in 1988. Then moved up with debut against Quick Tillis, then beat the likes of Pinklon Thomas, Michael Dokes, Adelson Rodriguez, Alex Stewart, and then beat Buster Douglas for the world title in 1990. Defended against the likes of George Foreman, Smokin' Bert Cooper, Larry Holmes, lost it to Riddick Bowe, regained it against Riddick Bowe, of course, lost it then to Michael Moore. But he wins over Ray Mercer, Bobby Ches, who can forget the wins over Mike Tyson, Michael Moore in the rematch, drew with Lennox Lewis, just an unbelievable champion. And as I said, retired with a record of 44, 10 and 2. As for Smokin' Joe Fraser, the Olympic gold medalist from 1964, it was, turned pro in 1965. Won the title almost by default when they took the titles off Larry Holmes. Got his revenge, or call it revenge, or his what would you call it? He earned his respect, I suppose, and was respected by all with that win over Muhammad Ali in 1971. Was it? I think I said 1971. I think I might have said 1970 the other day. It was 1971. Lost the belt to George Foreman in 73. And then had those memorable fights with Muhammad Ali, the rubber match or the rematch and the rubber match. Fought George Foreman again and was stopped again, and retired in 1981 with that 32-4 and 127 knockout record. So we'll go to the scorecards for starters. Actually, one more comment before I do that. Julian says Larry Holmes was Ali's sparring partner. Certainly was. And Holyfield was a very durable fighter. One of the most durable of all time, Julian. All right, to the scorecards. A very, very close-ish decision, this one. The winner with a percentage of 58%. The real deal, Evander Holyfield, gets the nod over Smokin' Joe Fraser. This one surprised me a little bit because I must admit I thought that there's a lot of people out there that probably a bit nostalgic would have went for Smokin' Joe Fraser, but I think the right decision has been made. I think that Evander Holyfield would get the win over Joe Fraser. And the reason I say it is, and what gives me a little bit of confidence to say, is that look at the way that Evander Holyfield fought against Mike Tyson. Now, no, Tyson and Fraser, they're similar but not similar, if that makes sense. Obviously, short, stocky, both big punches. But one thing that Fraser had that Tyson didn't was endurance. Now, he could just do, for 15 rounds, he'd be slipping and weaving and throwing those big punches. Tyson would be gassed after probably 3 or 4 rounds and really struggle after that point. So that's where the similarities probably end. But it's more so the way Holyfield handled Tyson's style that makes me think that he would beat Fraser. And on top of that, the fact that Holyfield was one of the fittest, most durable heavyweights of all time. And I just think that he would match Fraser's work rate and his fitness and endurance and everything. And on top of that, he would be able to match his work rate. I just think he would, with the toughness that he would have, he would be able to just to go with Fraser, which a lot of fighters couldn't do. And again, that the fact that he was able to break down Mike Tyson gives me more confidence to pick him. So I just think it'd be a hell of a fight. In my opinion, probably be the best fight of any of these fights on this card that we've put together here. I just think Fraser would just keep coming. As we all know, he'd be throwing that left hook from the floor to the body to the head, and he would just keep coming for 15 rounds. Holyfield, as I said, I just think he'd be able to go with him. I think he would be able to match him for the work rate of the 12 or 15 rounds. And I think he would win a very, very tough 12 or 15 round decision over Joe Fraser. What do we got there? Nectar of the Gods. Holyfield for me, but if drug tested, then yeah, well, he never failed a drug test though, did he? I don't think. Holyfield by headbutt. No disrespect to Holyfield. Well, he did have a habit of leading with his head a little bit, Kane. I will say that. And maybe there would be some head clashes in this one. But, this for me is the best fight on this card. I just think it would be, we'll say it's 15 rounds. I just think it would be a 15-round war. I'm not so sure either one of these fighters would be the same fighter after this. That's how hard it would be. Both of them had not really any other fights against each other like this one would be. I mean, everyone that Fraser fought, none of them could really go with him as far as his work rate and, well, I was going to say power, but it would have been some fighters that went with him for power. But that work rate and endurance and toughness that he had, not many fighters went with him, if any. And Evander Holyfield was the same. This is why I love the fight so much. The clash, almost the irresistible force versus the immovable object type of fight, where it would just be constant for 3 minutes of every round. And as I said, I just don't think either fighter would be the same. But I'm going to go with Evander Holyfield on points in a very, very tough fight. I think it would be unanimous, but I think there might only be a couple of rounds in it. That's how close I think it would be. And what a fight they would give the fans. All right, let's go to the second last fight. We'll call this the co-main. And it is Iron Mike Tyson up against the 1974 version of Big George Foreman. Mike Tyson, 50 wins, 7 losses, 44 knockouts. Kid Dynamite, later changed his name, obviously, to Iron Mike. Turned pro, 1985. Got his first and big opportunity against Trevor Berbick in 1986. Won the WBC heavyweight title, unified it against Bonecrusher Smith, and then against Tony Tucker for all the belts. Beat the likes of Pinklon Thomas, Tyrell Biggs, Larry Holmes, Tony Tubbs, Michael Spinks, Frank Bruno, Carl the Truth Williams, of course, lost to James Buster Douglas. And that was pretty much the end of the road for Tyson as far as his peak went. Of course, went to jail after that. Did have those fights with Razor Ruddock. Who can forget that fight with Peter McNeely? Won the world title again against Frank Bruno, but lost it in those memorable fights with Evander Holyfield. And then after that, it was pretty much all over. Look, he had that fight with Lennox Lewis in 2002. You throw a few fighters in there like Andrew Gallotta and those types of guys, but overall, and don't forget Jake Paul, of course, later in his career. He said about that, the better. But yeah, retired with a record of 50-7, 44 knockouts. Big George Foreman, 76-5, 68 knockouts. The Olympic gold medalist in 1968, turned pro in 1969, won the world title in 1973 with that brutal knockout of Joe Fraser. Lost it against Muhammad Ali. And then had the loss to Jimmy Young in 1977, and we didn't see him for 10 years, and that was the second coming of George Foreman. Lost his first world title fight to Evander Holyfield in a unbelievably good performance by George Foreman, by the way. He went 12 rounds with peaked Evander Holyfield. Lost the WBO title fight to WBO heavyweight title fight to Tommy Morrison, and everyone thought he was done. Got another shot at the title 17 months later. This time, got the job done against Michael Moorer by 10th round knockout, and that was sort of it for for George Foreman. Lost his last fight in 97 against Shannon Briggs. So who wins this fight and why? We will go to the scorecards. What's that last one there, Kane? No one's backing down. That was Holyfield and Fraser, that's for sure. Next to the guide says would have been a great fight. All right, to the scorecards. And the winner is, let's go to I was going to say the winner, but ladies and gentlemen, we have our first draw of the night. It is Mike Tyson, 50%. George Foreman, 50%. Remember, by the way, this is 1974 George Foreman. Would it have been different if they had a fought when George Foreman was in his second career? Would have been a bit different. I think the 1974 version of both these guys, I'm picking George Foreman to win this fight against Mike Tyson. And when we say the version of Mike Tyson, I'm probably thinking the 1988-89 version of Mike Tyson. But all I look at and all I keep thinking of when I'm thinking of this fight, the 1974 version of George Foreman, is him fighting Joe Fraser and Ken Norton. He loved those smaller type of guys who would be bobbing and weaving, coming into his range, right into the range for the uppercuts and hooks. And I just think the 1974 version of George Foreman beats Mike Tyson. Now, it would be explosive. I think he might get Mike out of there in 4 or 5 rounds. Not to say to be easy. I'm just saying who lands first. I don't think Mike Tyson really had all the physical attributes. I mean, we all know he had the power, but such a small heavyweight height-wise, and George was a big guy. And at that time of his career, George was pretty nimble on his feet for such a big guy, and actually deceptively fast with his hands and deadly with those uppercuts and hooks. I just think Mike Tyson, bobbing and weaving, would come in. I'm not going to say would meet the same fate as Joe Fraser, that devastating second-round knockout, whatever it was. I think Mike Tyson would probably have some success. He might land some hooks early, but George Foreman had a chin of granite as well. And I think, especially being so much taller, I think he'd be able to withstand Mike Tyson's attempts to get in close to him. I think he'd be pushing. Remember what he did, even later in his career as well, he would push those opponents off. The ones that tried to get close, he would push them off and then come through with the big uppercuts and hooks after that. And I just think that the height of George Foreman would cause Mike Tyson all sorts of problems. George had a very, very good jab as well. He would just sort of poke it out there and set them up for those uppercuts and hooks. I just think Mike would be a bit predictable coming in. Mike would definitely have the advantage in speed, make no mistake about it, but he wouldn't have the advantage in power. I'll give that to George Foreman. And I just think George Foreman, with his height, his reach, I just think, and just the power that he had, he would time Mike Tyson coming in. And in the 4th or 5th round, I think he would land one of those punches, and I think it would be lights out for Mike Tyson. Let's see what you guys had to say. Pussy says Mike overpowers George. Nectar says Tyson by KO in round 4. Kane says Big George from me by KO. Tyson wouldn't be able to intimidate Foreman. George Foreman was a killer. Mike Tyson at 220 a chance. Kane says, I've seen a picture of a young Foreman carrying a calf on his back. He was a bad man back in the day, Kane. Nectar says, I was a massive Tyson fanboy in my younger days. Simple, can't pick against him. Yeah, look, I was the same, Nectar. I just thought Mike Tyson was just unbeatable when he was at his peak. 86 to sort of 89, untouchable. But as I said, I just think, again, style-wise, I just think that he just wouldn't be able to get close enough to George to throw those big overhand rights and those big left hooks. I think the fact that, as I said, George was so much taller, I just think he'd be able to pick those shots coming. And by the time they sort of reached up to George, I just think they might have lost a little bit of their velocity. And on top of that, George having a really, really good chin. And I just think he catches Tyson at some stage in the 4th or 5th round, maybe with an uppercut or something. And I think he could knock Mike Tyson out. I know later in his career, especially against, was it Lennox Lewis, knocked out Tyson. He walked straight into that right hand. I'm not going to really count that Tyson because he was probably about 10 or 12 years past his peak. But that sort of gives me just the thoughts of George Foreman being able to do the same. So George Foreman for me, 1974 version over Mike Tyson. All right, let's get into our main event. And we've saved, is it the best for last? Let me know. It is Muhammad Ali up against Lennox Lewis, the greatest Muhammad Ali, 56-5, 37 knockouts, the 1960 Olympic gold medalist, won the title in 1964. I think he was at 24 years of age over, George Foreman. Sonny Liston defended it numerous times until he lost the belts, not to anyone in particular, of course. He lost it to the US government and was out for 3 years. Came back with a couple of wins over Jerry Quarry and Oscar Bonavena. Lost that fight to Joe Fraser. Would get a second shot at Fraser down the track. He would then, I'm just trying to think, when did he beat? He lost to Ken Norton in 1973. That's right. Avenged that loss to Norton. Beat Joe Fraser in 74 in a pretty dull fight, actually, from memory. And strangely enough, both guys wore white, which is pretty unheard of back in the day that both fighters were allowed to wear the same colours. That's getting off point a little bit there. But that was at Madison Square Garden. Then beat George Foreman to regain the heavyweight title and the rubber match with Joe Fraser in Manila, the rubber match against Ken Norton as well. And then I think we can sort of forget about the rest. He lost the title to Leon Spinks, but did win the title for a third time against Leon Spinks in 1978. But then we won't talk about those last two fights against Larry Holmes and Trevor Berbick. As for Lennox Lewis, 41-2-1, 32 KOs, won the Olympic gold medal in 1988, won the world title for the first time, or what did I say his record was? There, 2 losses, that's right. Against, who was it there? Lionel Butler. No, that was the Eliminator. When did he actually win? There it is, Oliver McCall. There you go. I knew it was against one of those guys. Oliver McCall in 1997 with a 5th round stoppage. Now, it actually lost. No, I'm getting ahead of myself there. Sorry, guys. I've gone way ahead here. Sorry. I'll go back. All right. Tony Tucker, it was, and he won the WBC. I think it was for the vacant WBC heavyweight title, wasn't it? Because Riddick Bowe put it in the trash. Did win over 12 rounds, beat Frank Bruno, then lost it to Oliver McCall. Sorry, guys, I've skipped ahead there. Beat our own Justin Fortune, if you know that name, of course. One of the trainers of Manny Pacquiao, avenged against Oliver McCall, then had the fights and wins against the likes of Andrew Gallotta, Shannon Briggs. Evander Holyfield had the draw against him as well. The upset against Hasim Rahman also avenged that loss to him, and then had the win over Mike Tyson and finished with that win over Vitaly Klitschko. All right, so who wins and why? Let's go to the scorecards. All right, so the winner with a score of 83%, the greatest, Muhammad Ali, gets the chocolate. So Muhammad Ali with, 83% over Lennox Lewis. Look, I think this fight would have been extremely close, and it was a really, really tough one to pick. Now, I suppose when we're looking at the Ali of which one to put up against Lennox Lewis, is it the one that first won the title against Sonny Liston, or is it the one later in life or later in his career that beat George Foreman? That's probably the one I think was the most mature. Look, maybe when did he win the title? 64 against Liston. I'm probably thinking the second coming of Muhammad Ali after he came back from the Exodus, from when he was banned for 3 years. Even though he lost to Joe Fraser, to me, that was the peak Muhammad Ali for me. And then, of course, when he beat George Foreman in 1974. So I'm probably looking sort of 1971 to 74 version of Muhammad Ali up against Lennox Lewis. Now, the size of Lennox Lewis is the thing that makes me really consider picking him to beat Muhammad Ali. I just think such a big guy, had a really, really good jab, could punch, of course, pretty durable. But the thing that makes me go for Muhammad Ali in the end was what I said before against the British heavyweights. All just a little bit mechanical, a little bit robotic-like. And I think that's what swings the edge for me against Muhammad Ali. I think he'd be moving and jabbing all night. I'm just not sure Lewis had the ability and was fast enough on his feet and even with his hands to cut Muhammad Ali off and make him pay. You remember that Muhammad Ali on his toes. I know later in his career he really set down on his feet and traded a lot more than what he should have, but that 1971 to 1974 version of Ali was on his toes. He'd move, he'd stick the jab out, and I just think that his speed and his footwork would be too much for Lennox Lewis, again because of that British robot style. Lewis would have some success, I got no doubt, but I just think the overall class of Ali would just be too much for Lennox Lewis. Now, don't get me wrong either, by the way. I think Lennox Lewis is in the top 10 heavyweights of all time. I just think Muhammad Ali was just, as his moniker says, he was the greatest. And I just think his skill set, his movement, even his work rate. Muhammad Ali worked pretty hard when he fought. He was always on the move, balking, feinting, jabbing to the head, jabbing to the body, setting him up for the right hands. Didn't have a lot of problems with taller guys either. So that probably, again, makes me pretty confident in picking Muhammad Ali. But make no mistake, Lennox Lewis was a great heavyweight. I just think Muhammad Ali was greater, and I think he wins a unanimous decision over Lennox Lewis. So give me your thoughts, guys. Get to a couple of comments before we go. Big J, Ali was 22 when he beat Liston. Sorry, all right, 22. I thought he was 24. But either way, I think that Muhammad Ali, if 7 or 8 years later, well, what's that, late 20s, around 30, I think that's where Muhammad Ali was at his peak. Julian says, Ali's ring IQ legendary. Ali for me. Ali would have been an odds-on favourite. Ali just too slick for Lewis. Kane says, Ali for me, the man can do it all. Late 70s Ali would run rings around him, in my opinion. Next to that, don't want to pick Ali. Not a fan of draft dodgers, but he certainly could box. I think he had his reasons, though, Nectar. Without getting political about the whole thing, I think he had his reasons. Not that he was a coward or anything like that. He had his religious and not political beliefs, his religious beliefs. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of anyone that doesn't or didn't back then go into the military. But again, he had his reasons. And Kane says Ali that fought Cleveland Williams was Ali at his best. What was that, late 60s, was it, Kane, I think, from memory? Yeah, he was something else back then, wasn't he? So let's do a quick run through, guys. We'll go through the results. For the first fight, Bonecrusher Smith against Jerry Cooney. The poll was 57% for Bonecrusher Smith. I agreed. I think he beats Jerry Cooney. Daniel Dubois and Tim Witherspoon. The poll results was Tim Witherspoon 73%. I agreed. I think he would beat Daniel Dubois. Next one was Michael Spinks against Ken Norton. This was one of the late replacements, so no poll results, but I think Michael Spinks would win that one. Deontay Wilder was next against Tommy Morrison. I'm not sure I actually picked. I can't remember who I picked in that one. The poll was Morrison by 73%. I'm not sure I gave my I did, didn't I? I gave my pick in that one. It was Tommy Morrison. That's right. I think it was. Either way, whether I did or I didn't, it's Tommy Morrison for me. Anthony Joshua up against Riddick Bowe. Again, no poll results because that was a late replacement. But for me, I thought Riddick Bowe would win that fight. Joe Lewis against Sonny Liston. I had Joe Lewis winning on points. The poll disagreed. They had Sonny Liston by 55% of the votes. Larry Holmes against Tyson Fury. I picked Larry Holmes on points. The poll said Larry Holmes or 75% of the vote said Larry Holmes. Evander Holyfield against Smokin' Joe Fraser. Evander Holyfield on points for me. The poll agreed 58% had him beating Joe Fraser. Mike Tyson against the 1974 version of George Foreman. I had George Foreman by knockout. The poll disagreed. No, they didn't. They didn't disagree. It was 50-50, a bit like all of us speaking here in the chat. And the last fight was Muhammad Ali against Lennox Lewis. I had Muhammad Ali on points, and the poll agreed, going for Ali in the vote of 83%. So that was all the fights. So, guys, that's it for the heavyweights. I think next week we'll get back to a fighter. I think I said last time we were going to do Floyd Mayweather. I think the reason I did this, by the way, is because especially when we're going to do Floyd Mayweather, we've done a lot of fights around that weight in the first few episodes. That's why I've gone a little bit off track in the last couple of weeks with the overall dream fight, so the best of every division, and this week the heavyweight. So I think we will do Floyd Mayweather next week and pit him against some of those memorable fighters from different eras, and the list of fighters you could rattle off. It's going to be massive. What's that, Kane? I meant to say late 60s. Yeah, it was at his best. Yeah, it probably was Kane. I just think he matured a little bit more early 70s, but yeah, late 60s, early 70s, whatever it was. I think still enough to beat Lennox Lewis. So, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks to everyone that's joined in. Thanks to everyone that actually voted on the on Instagram. So, again, if you don't follow us on Instagram, make sure you do that. The poll goes up about 24 hours before we come on air, and then I'll always give those results before I give my verdict on the show. So, guys, that's going to do it for the heavyweights. Really appreciate your comments, input, all that sort of stuff. And we'll catch you next week for the next episode of Dream Fights. Catch you then.